Greetings. Good Thursday morning, the 11th of August, 2022, third decade of the 21st century. I always open with that because I think it's amazing, in my personal opinion, my personal estimation, of where we are on the timeline and what sort of things we're talking about. The sort of things that are mainstreaming, or the sort of topics, or the sort of concepts. Take your pick. Um, whether it's a byproduct of technology or a direct result of technology, some of the things that are happening, whether in the world or specifically in our country, kind of amaze me, which is why I always address, third decade of the 21st century. you know uh, Sociopolitically, we have a concept and or a trend where there are certain people who think that um, the United States is as bad or worse as the post Civil War era up until the civil rights movement of the early 1960s. Um, you know, and then, of course, when you look at politics, it feels and seems as though more and more people are into politics. And the only thing I can come up with is that because of the internet and smartphones and the ability to communicate anything and everything, via the internet, via social media, via smartphones, whatever the case may be, all of these things wrapped into one, that we are more aware and yet not aware at all, because you don't necessarily have to communicate the truth. All right, you can be the first one to establish it as a lie. You can be the first one to establish the lie as the truth, or you can be the first one to communicate misinformation. And what I absolutely love is the overwhelming majority of left-leaning news outlets were being accused of misinformation, propaganda, etc. And you have to admire some of the intelligence and the resiliency behind them, because they've latched onto it and said, no, 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 you're absolutely right. Misinformation, propaganda is a real thing, but it's not us. It's everybody else who's not us. And, well, let's face it, who's everybody else? Well, the only news outlet that is on the right is Fox. And then anybody else who disagrees with the left is part of the problem. And I find these accusations and labels dangerous, but that's where we're at. Um, And part of this video is going to be reading and reacting to basically my one and only um, participant, which is Stace Catalan out of the Austin area of Texas. We don't always see eye to eye on everything, probably sociopolitical stuff, but we also agree that as human beings, that we shouldn't be demonizing each other, that we should potentially try to build bridges and open the lines of communication to try to understand one another and see how we can potentially get along. Because otherwise, if you rely on the opinions and the hearsay and whatnot of others, it seems as though all they want to do is divide us. And that's a big reason why I started this channel in the first place about 2 years ago, was my lack of trust in the media and my overwhelming concern at the direction we were going. I once hypothesized that uh, basically the powers that be, if you put the tinfoil hat on for a moment, the powers that be on the left, all right, which would basically represent the Democratic Party, the party of the Confederacy, the party of the Civil War, the essentially anti-POC party, all right, that the only reason they seem to be the kinder, gentler, sympathetic option to marginalized people, so to speak, is strictly for votes and only for votes. And at the end of the day, they really don't have their best interests at heart. And that the if you believe in conspiracies for a moment, if you entertain them for a moment, that their ultimate chess move is to force a secondary civil war where regardless of political allies, ultimately what I think they're hoping for is a Nazi-ish style civil war where the marginalized, whether it's people of color, the LGBTQ plus community, basically band together and all of their sympathizers versus everybody who's not 100% into that sort of thing, which scares me because I think tactically, I think logistically, um, it would not work out. And, you know, the overwhelming majority of us that are not necessarily in camp POC, in camp LGBTQ plus, a lot of us just don't really care enough to hate. A lot of us are just like, look, I'm just trying to get through the day. I'm just trying to, you know, do what I got to do to put food on the table, pay the bills, keep the roof over my head. But if you back me into a corner over something I may not agree with, and you force me to fight, then I'll fight and I'll have to be on the other side, the other team. And I hope that makes sense. I don't think that the true people in charge of the left actually have the marginalized interests in mind. But that's just my 2 cents. So with that in mind, I would like to read, react, and respond to Stace's most recent comments, and maybe add a few comments of my own with regards to recent events. So here we go. Uh, this is Stace. If it had happened in my state, if the blue side, since I live in a red state, had done as much damage to anywhere in our city, one of the major cities of our state, and the capital as well, there should be the same action against the party who did the damage. I believe that whether or not any of the riots that have broken out, those who broke the laws, should be judged by a jury of their peers and have judgment of guilt or innocence. Okay, and have judgment of guilt or innocence. So, what we're referring to there is this whole January 6th stuff where it feels rather lopsided. And, to be completely honest, I get it. It's Washington D.C. It's the capital, and a bunch of people succumbed to mob mentality and did some stupid stuff. All right, basically a protest got hijacked. And am I open-minded enough to concede that perhaps in other cities where riots and looting and damage and blah 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 broke out, that originally it started out as a protest by people who legitimately wanted to peacefully protest, secured permits to protest, but other people hijacked it? Absolutely. Do I believe in the conspiracy that there are professional agitators that are potentially on somebody's payroll? Absolutely. The only thing I disagree with is I feel as though a mountain is being made out of this where not enough was being made out of Seattle, San Francisco, Portland, uh, Kenosha, Wisconsin, you know, all these different cities where, because the people committing these offenses were on the left, the Democratic Party's completely okay with it. I mean, you got people like the vice president saying, mostly peaceful protests and stuff of that nature. However, when it came to the Capitol, nobody's trying to accentuate or identify, protesters from rioters, etc. So all I was trying to do was highlight the double standard. The problem I've noticed is this: because of the division in this country, and this division that highlights, emphasizes, and stimulates our bias, where do we go? Can we get over it? Because I'm not on the left. All right. What left, progressive, liberal, whatever the case may be, I'm probably more down the center than anything. All right. Because as soon as the right starts to invoke religion, that's where you lose me. And I think I've said that numerous times, and I don't think I need to go any further than that. The right will lose me whenever they start to invoke religion. I just have a thing against religion. Not people who are religious, but people who try to. I just have a problem with religion in general as a basis for all conduct. But I digress. Uh, so I just find it extremely hypocritical about how things are being taken care of. And the problem is, again, if you go back to our biases often are tied to our emotions, like and dislike. Um, and I personally find it hypocritical where others, maybe even Stace, are like, hey, yeah, we absolutely need to spend millions and millions of dollars investigating January 6th, but we don't need to concern ourselves with what's going on in California. We don't need to concern ourselves with what's going on in Portland or Seattle or anything else of that nature. So, yeah, I just find it hypocritical, but it's always great to get feedback. And Stace, thank you. Moving on, Stace. Reagan had been someone that had been an actor. There have been several politicians that started as something else. However, Jesse Ventura or Reagan still held firm to their party's beliefs. In my opinion, again, Trump looks after himself rather than his party. His endorsements of candidates now, I honestly do not know how much thought he actually put into when endorsing. Prime example is Eric prime example, the Eric issue. There was a third choice, independent. When Ross Perot ran for office, and may have been why Clinton was able to win, Perot even made it into the debates with Bush and Clinton. That election was one of the few times my mother did not vote Republican. She voted for Perot. And the main reason why I knew she would eventually vote for Trump. I think some of the people that had been responding. Oh, sorry, we're going to get to that in a second. Um, so this goes back to the fact that I had mentioned that my thing with Trump was I didn't want him to be the candidate, but when he became the candidate, I voted for him based on hope. Hope that because he was not an established politician, that he would bring something different to the table. And in some cases he did. In some ways he did. And what I find interesting about Trump is, and I've always associated him with um, that of like a contractor, you know, can build the hell out of a house, can plumb the hell out of plumbing, can wire the hell out of electrical, but not like the most cerebral talker. And I really don't mean that to be an insult to contractors of any kind, but, you know, where the focus is on the labor, okay? I look at our gas prices. I look at our economy. I look at all the different things that I feel we were benefiting from. Where you know maybe Trump should not have been the mouthpiece. Maybe Trump should have just been the guy behind the scenes. And unfortunately, that's just not the way it works. The president unfortunately has to be both seen and heard. And Trump did not win the popularity contest. I will say this. As a registered voter, as an American citizen who takes advantage of the freedom of speech, the First Amendment, I do not believe that the 2020 election was fair. I do not believe for 1 second that 80 million legitimate registered voters voted for the current president. I can believe a lot of people did not like Trump's personality, but I can't believe that all of a sudden the most voters that have ever voted in an election between all candidates, 80 million voted for Biden. Just I just can't believe it. Um, Interestingly enough, when it comes to Bush, Clinton, and Perot, Bush actually won the popular vote. He lost the electoral vote. He lost the electoral vote to Clinton. Clinton won the electoral college. He had more electoral votes and less popular votes. So I find it funny that the Democratic Party wants to get rid of the Electoral College because, in the case of, like, I want to say Donald Trump, it didn't work in their favor. But as soon as it works in their favor, I guarantee they'll be the first ones to say, it's a great system, blah, blah, blah. And even some of those politicians like AOC and whatnot who are screaming that we need to abolish the electoral college, if it works in their favor, I guarantee they won't backtrack. Okay, where were we? I think we switched a little bit here. Um, I think some of the people that had been responding to the subject that shall not be named were just trying to get the point of trying to walk in someone else's shoes. I just think a lot of it was not expressed well. It's the rapist. Oh, okay. Yeah, on that particular subject, um, I also think it came down to not so much whether you can walk in somebody else's shoes, because even if you can, you don't have to agree. You don't have to approve. You don't have to like. You can walk a mile in my shoes, not like, agree, or approve of everything. And I think that's fair. I think that's perfectly fair. And I think I tried my damnedest to maintain decorum where others did not. And others did not respect the fact that I disagreed when that is the premises of my channel. You know, there's no guarantee to agree. There's no guarantee to, okay, you changed my mind. It's just, hey, let's discuss it. And I do believe I'm with you on that one, that the decorum quickly diminished. And I'm going to blame those who lost their cool. I'm going to put the blame solely on those, because I'm a very open about whether I agree or disagree or where I stand on certain issues, and I tried to be as polite as I could. But at the end of the day, it was not reciprocated. I was treated extremely poorly, extremely unfair, and I'll be extremely blunt. For people who demand tolerance, you also have to be tolerant yourself. And I don't mean you, Stace, but you get the point. Okay, on the subject of rape, uh, it's the rapist family that can sue. The rapist, convicted or acquitted, cannot sue their victim should the victim become pregnant and choose to have an abortion. Only the rapist family. That that still just blows my mind. You know, I I'm just trying to wrap my head around that. Like, well, we understand our son raped your daughter, but as a consequence, our grandchild is now growing inside your daughter's body. And, well, I just got to tell you, we really want some grandkids. I don't know why I'm doing a redneck hillbilly voice, but I apologize. Well, I just got to tell you, me and the missus really just want some grandkids. So, yeah, we're going to demand that your daughter carries that as if she won't forget our son raping her. We're going to demand that she carries that baby to term, and then we take over the grandchild. I, it, it just, I'm sorry, Stace, it just seems completely absurd to me. Oh, hang on a second. My French toast is beeping. Okay, sorry about that. I'm uh I'm making this new recipe that contains Greek yogurt, almond milk, and egg whites, and French and Texas toast, and then you bake it. So we'll see. Sorry about the interruption. Yeah, that whole rapist thing just blows my mind. What on that particular topic, the other thing that blows my mind is the miscommunication period, in that most red states, for the most part, have what some of us might consider to be common sense laws, like rape, incest, health of the mother, health of the child, but none of that's being communicated. What's being communicated is an antagonistic message, a salacious message, an inflammatory message. The lack of choice. And Stace, I don't mind going back and forth on this one if you're cool with it, um, because my other question is, whatever happened to responsibility? Not you, but if one of the concepts being argued is my body, my choice, okay, well, just hear me out. Again, the background on this is I don't really have much of a dog in the fight, but I don't mind arguing just for the sake of argument. Your body, your choice. So so an individual woman decides that once she got pregnant, she does not wish to be a mother. It's just not the right time. Okay, your body, your choice. Well, you also chose to have sex, potentially unprotected sex. I'm not here to argue whether the condom broke or the diaphragm broke or your spermicide gel didn't work. I'm just saying you actively made the choice with your body to have sex, where one of the consequences, if you want to view it as such, is procreation, creating life. Just like, equally and opposite, you can get a sexually transmitted disease. Unfortunately, even though it's your body, your choice, you can't just go and abort the sexually transmitted disease. Some of these STDs can be treated to a conclusion. Some of them will be with you for life. Some of them will be with you to the point where you may eventually die. And what blows my mind is I see these commercials where, from my perspective, my point of view, is that they're almost promoting a lack of responsibility. Where I feel as though, and Stace, I don't know if you agree with me or not, based on our age, but I feel like my generation, and Stace, I think we're about the same age, so I feel like our generation was very, very concerned, more so with STDs and less with pregnancy, although we were equally worried about pregnancy, but more so about the STDs, where we took precautions specifically towards STDs, and I'll be even more to the point, because of the AIDS pandemic of the 80s, we were way more cautious about HIV and AIDS, which is why we protected ourselves. So now I feel like we've gotten to a point in society where we're basically practicing a sense and preaching and promoting a sense of irresponsibility, but that's just my 2 cents. And then, Stace, your last thing was you'd like to hear my thoughts and my position on Alex Jones. Unfortunately, I'm not entirely up to speed, other than I believe he's either on trial or participating in a trial. Um, because essentially, if I'm not mistaken, it, I'd have to go back and research it. Um, I don't know if he's being I don't know if he's being held accountable for slander and liable, or if he's just being held, or if there's an attempt to hold him accountable for saying things that people don't like. And even Alex Jones has admitted that he's a lot like a broken clock. He can be right twice a day, but there's 24 hours in a day, and he can only be right twice a day. Or, he's 80/20. 80% of the stuff is oftentimes nonsense, but 20% is true. But what I'll do is I'll go back and research that and get you a response. I'll have time after I publish this tomorrow. Beyond that, the latest thing hitting the news is the Trump raid at Mar-a-Lago. So let me express a few points and then express some opinions. Some of the talking points I've heard from numerous pundits is the weaponization by a political party of our Department of Justice, to include the Federal Bureau of Investigations, as well as anecdotal, I don't want to say evidence, but anecdotal suggestion that it's happened in the past solely by Democrats. I think statistically and historically speaking, that is accurate. And then, of course, whether or not their actions were justified in Mar-a-Lago or not, regardless of technicality. Because the funny thing is, so many things can be viewed as an infraction, but then people sit there and their job is to weigh action versus reaction, action, consequence, so on and so forth. Is the risk worth the gain? So, some of the things I've heard is that the purpose and reason for the raid was not justified. So let's move beyond that. Here's the problem I find myself dealing with. My own personal bias, I despise the Democratic Party just in principle, going all the way back to the Confederacy. At the conclusion of the Civil War, the Democratic Party should have been abolished. Just name, principle, you name it. But I got to be realistic, because unless you also abolish those people, which basically means death, or imprisonment, the ideologies, the sentiments, the feelings, etc., you'd never be able to abolish unless, of course, you were going to slaughter or imprison people who held those positions. So, fine, the Democratic Party was allowed to exist. So, unfortunately, I have a very difficult bias that I have to deal with when it comes to the Democratic Party, which means I have a very knee-jerk reflect reflex action towards negative emotions when it comes to the Democratic Party and things that they do. And here's why I say that. Because while I want Republicans or independents to respond in kind, fight fire with fire, the turmoil I find in my mind, and I'm curious if anybody else, whether it's you, Stace, or anybody else watching this video, feels the same way, where should turnaround be fair play? And if so, where does it end? Because to fight fire with fire, turnaround being fair play, is either one of two things. Either A, the Republicans take over and then they weaponize the Department of Justice to include the Federal Bureau of Investigations, or they do an internal audit and subsequently fire, charge with crimes, send to trial, and imprison several people for various reasons, which, what is that going to do to our country? And the truth is, I'm just going to admit that this is where I'm probably capped out. This is where I have exceeded my knowledge base, because Newton's third law states that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So going back to the conspiracy theory, if the real powers that be want to provoke a civil war, then the greatest thing is to do stuff like this. The greatest thing is to, like with the 87,000 IRS agents, once you concede power to the government, you will never get it back. The Democratic Party has always been about expanding the powers of government, expanding the size of government. Once that power has been given to them, they will never give it back. Oh, there's my French toast. Hang on. Okay, French toast is done and it looks good. But back to the serious stuff. Yeah, so as I was saying, if you believe in the conspiracy for a moment, the powers that be that are in charge of the left, that potentially want a civil war, this is a great way to do it. I mean, it's a great way to do it. Basically push the boundaries to where even reasonable people are like, oh, this is bad. This is real bad. Because once it's allowed to happen, once you're allowed to get away with it, turnaround is fair play. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. That means the Republicans should be equally allowed to do the exact same thing. And then it just goes back to that other concept, right? Conceding power to the government, they'll never give it back. The Democratic Party's always been about increasing the size. I mean, 87,000 IRS agents to go after the middle class? Thank you, but no thank you. So where do we go from here? I don't know, because too many of us have internal bias. While I'm trying to build bridges of communication, and I've got a party of one, Stace, thank you so much for being here. Where do we go from here? Because I think the actions are god awful. And then I look at, everything in general, going all the way back to Hillary Clinton, who basically said anybody who would vote for Trump is not exactly the best and brightest of the nation. It's not exactly, you know, the people that we want representing America, the deplorables. And then now that's been picked up by celebrities, whether they're actors and actresses, YouTube, social media stars, news pundits. I mean, that has basically become a mantra that if you're not with us, then you're against us. And as a result of which, you lack in intelligence, you lack in decency, you lack in humanity. Basically, everything that my channel is about, not demonizing each other, not dehumanizing each other, when everything else going on is exactly that. You know, oh, well, if you don't agree with the raid, then you're a less than intelligent person who should not be representing America and you're just bad. It just blows my mind. So, I, I'm curious to anybody else. And Stace, I look forward to your comments if in fact you do comment. But for anybody else, I'm very curious. You know, do you believe turnaround should be fair play, or do you believe no, 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 the left is always in the right, the left is ordained by God, or whatever God of your choice, and everything they do is on the up and up, or just what? Just what do you think? And I get it. Many people in America just didn't like Trump. Just didn't like him. I get it. He didn't exactly win the popularity contest with a large portion of the country. I get that. But does that mean he should be persecuted in the manner of which he's being persecuted, especially if he's the potential front runner against Biden? And with Biden's current everything, all right, the inflation, the recession, the overall status of our country, I don't think, unfortunately, I say this knowing I have bias involved, I don't think he's done anything to improve anything in this country. I mean, I'll just keep it booty butt crack simple. If I'm paying $4 and I live in a state where gas is not as expensive as other states, if I'm paying $4 a gallon at the pump, that's hurting me. All right? If I don't travel any farther or any less than I used to, all right? So my travels to and fro have remained the same, but now I'm paying as much as $3 more at the pump. That's hurting my bottom line. And then conversely, if everything else has gone up, all right, just go to a home improvement store, inquire about building materials, and maybe do a cost comparison of what they were under Trump and under Biden. I'll just leave it at that. But I say that knowing I have bias. I I don't think the country's any better. I don't think he's competent, but I digress. I want to hear from you. I want to hear what you have to say. Drop a comment. Otherwise, I don't care if you like. I don't care if you subscribe. I don't care if you hit the notification bell. I'm just trying to open up lines of communication with people, whether we agree or disagree. All right. And where do we go from here? Because I feel as though other entities are trying to push us in a direction we don't need to go in. So if you do and you leave a comment, I appreciate you. You're awesome. Till next time.